Wife left me after my cancer diagnosis, texting, I didn't sign up for this. Little did she know I'd come back stronger than ever. I used to think that love meant staying, no matter what. I believed that showing up, cooking the meals, folding the laundry just the way he liked it, sitting through his moods, swallowing my own sadness, was love. I believed that putting myself last meant I was a good wife, a good woman, a good mother. But even before the text that changed everything, something inside me had started to wither, quietly, almost imperceptibly, like a houseplant in the corner of a room that no one waters anymore. We've been married 42 years. 42. I used to say it with pride. When people asked, now it feels like a sentence I served without parole. Our days had become so routine they blurred together. Breakfast, his pills, the morning paper spread wide across the kitchen table like a barrier between us. I'd hum softly in the kitchen, pouring his coffee just the way he liked it, 2 creams, no sugar. He rarely looked up, rarely said thank you. Our conversations had shrunk to logistics. What's for dinner? Did you pay the power bill? The neighbor's dog is digging up the garden again. And I'd nod or respond, careful not to sound annoyed. Careful not to make waves, because I had always been the peacemaker. Even in our youth I played that role. He was charismatic in the early years, so full of opinions, certainty, purpose. I was drawn to it. I mistook his confidence for stability, mistook his silence for strength. But over time that silence became a weapon. A way to make me feel small without ever raising his voice. I can't remember the last time he asked how I was. Really asked. Not in passing, not distracted by the TV or the paper. I'm not sure he ever knew who I was beyond the roles I played. For him, wife, cook, nursemaid, emotional sponge, I used to volunteer at the community center, teaching basic computer skills to seniors. It gave me a kind of quiet joy to help someone open their first email, connect with a distant grandchild. But he scoffed at it, said I should spend less time playing with old ladies and more time at home. So I stopped. Like I stopped painting, stopped reading, stopped going for walks after dinner. I let the parts of me that weren't useful to others die out, one by one. Our daughter lives 3 states away. She calls occasionally when it's convenient, always short, rushed. Sorry, Mom, can't talk long. I don't blame her, not fully. I raised her to be independent, to chase her own life. I never wanted her to feel chained the way I did, but sometimes I wonder if I taught her that. I was unimportant by making myself invisible for so long, and then there was the lump. I found it in the shower one cold November morning, just under my left breast, hard and unmoving, my breath caught. I stood there, water pouring over me, trembling. Not just from fear of what it could mean, but from knowing that I'd have to tell him, and that he would not know how to be there for me. When I finally told him, he didn't meet my eyes, just nodded slowly and said, "We'll do what we need to do," before flipping the TV channel. That was it. No hug. No, I'm scared too. No reassurance. Just silence. At night, when the lights were off and his back was turned to me in bed, I'd feel the tears prick at the corners of my eyes. I didn't let them fall. I didn't want to wake him. Even now, after all these years, I still worried about disturbing his rest more than honoring my own grief. There were small signs of distance, missed anniversaries, distracted glances, the way he no longer asked me to dance in the kitchen when our song came on. But I told myself that this was just what marriage became over time, that I shouldn't expect passion or tenderness after 40 years, that I should be grateful he stayed. But now, looking back, I wonder if he was ever really with me at all. Back then I still believed love was enduring. I didn't realize that what I had been enduring wasn't love, it was neglect. Wearing the face of duty. And beneath that quiet routine, something had begun to crack. I didn't know it yet, but I was already beginning to wake up. The text came. While I was sitting in the doctor's office, waiting for my biopsy results, fluorescent lights hummed above me, too bright against the sterile white walls. I stared at a wilted magazine in my lap, something about summer recipes, and tried not to pick at the skin around my fingernails. My heart was hammering in my chest like it knew what was coming, like it had already accepted what I hadn't. My phone buzzed in my purse. I pulled it out, half hoping it was our daughter checking in. But it was him. Just a few words, sharp and surgical. "I didn't sign up for this, I'm sorry." That was it. No greeting, no name. No question if I was. Okay, not even a cowardly, "We'll talk later," just that. A text message like I was a cancellation on his calendar. For a moment I didn't move. My hands started to shake, and the words on the screen blurred. I blinked hard, willing it to say something else, anything else. But there it was, cold, clinical, definitive. My body suddenly felt foreign, like my skin didn't fit right. I could hear the nurse calling another patient's name, distant and muffled, as if I were underwater. My mouth went dry. I read it again. I didn't sign up for this. 42 years, and this was how he left me, not in person. Not even a phone call, a text. As if I were a bad business deal he needed to cut his losses on. As if my cancer diagnosis had turned me from wife to liability. I could barely feel my legs as I stood up and walked out. I mumbled something to the receptionist. I don't even remember what, and pushed through the glass doors into the afternoon sun. It was warm that day, but I felt cold to my bones. In the car, I sat behind the wheel, staring straight ahead. My hands were still trembling and my chest felt tight, as though someone had cinched a belt around my ribs. I didn't cry. Not yet. There was something so surreal about it, like I'd slipped into a nightmare version of my life. I kept thinking. He didn't even wait to see if I would live. He didn't ask if I was scared. He just walked away. God, it wasn't just the betrayal, it was the way he made it sound like I was a burden. Like I had broken some unspoken contract by needing help. Needing care. Needing him. The cruelest part wasn't that he left. It was realizing that maybe, deep down, he'd been gone for years, all those times he turned away from me in bed. All the eye rolls when I talked too long about things that mattered to me. All the moments he dismissed my worry, my fear, my dreams. This wasn't sudden, it was just the first time he'd put it into words. That night, I sat on the couch in silence, staring at the blank television screen. Our house felt emptier than it ever had. Even though his toothbrush was still in the bathroom, even though his shoes still sat by the door, I knew he wasn't coming back. I had cancer, and now I had to face it alone. When the tears finally came, they came in waves, hot, furious, aching. I sobbed into a throw pillow to muffle the sound, as if I were still afraid of waking him. Old habits die hard, I guess. I wasn't just crying for the man who left me. I was crying for the woman I'd been, for the woman who had stayed silent, who had worked herself into exhaustion to keep a cold marriage alive. I was crying for every time I told myself this is just how love is. The betrayal wasn't just in his leaving. It was in how little it took for him to go. I called him 3 days later. Not because I wanted answers, I already had them. Not because I wanted him back, I didn't, not anymore. But because something inside me refused to let his cowardice be the final word. He didn't get to vanish behind a text. Not after everything I had given. Not after everything I had endured. The phone rang twice before he picked up. He sounded startled. I imagined his face, that tight-lipped grimace he used when he didn't want to deal with emotion. Hello? His voice was thin, cautious, like he was bracing for something. Good. He should have been. I got your message, I said flatly. My voice was calm, but my hands were curled into fists in my lap. My chest ached, but I breathed through it. There was a long pause on the other end. I didn't know if I should call. You didn't know if you should? I laughed. Once sharp, bitter. You didn't think to call. After 42 years I get a breakup text because I'm sick? What kind of man does that? His sigh came through the line like static. I didn't mean for it to come out like that. But it did, I snapped. It did, and you meant it. He didn't answer. Silence had always been his go-to when things got hard. But I wasn't filling the silence for him anymore. I let it hang. Finally, he spoke. I'm sorry, all right? I panicked. I didn't know how to handle it. I'm not good with this kind of thing. This kind of thing. I repeated. You mean your wife being diagnosed with cancer? You didn't sign up for that? Is that what love meant to you? Convenience? I was shaking now, not from fear, not even from grief, but from a rage that had been building for years, pressed down behind every polite smile, every nod, every time I bit my tongue. I gave you everything, I continued. I cooked. I cleaned. I stayed home when I wanted to travel. I made myself small so you could feel big. I lived in your shadow, and I did it because I thought that's what love was, sacrifice. I never asked you to do all that, he said quietly. No, I said, my voice rising. You didn't have to. You expected it. And when I needed you to show up, really show up, you ran. Another pause. Then, I'm sorry. I really am. I don't think I'm strong enough to do this with you. I closed my eyes. For a moment, his honesty almost hurt more than the betrayal itself. I don't think I'm strong enough. That was the most truthful thing he had ever said to me. Well, I am, I said. There was something solid in me now, something that wouldn't bend anymore. I had spent my life trying to keep things together for him, for our daughter, for everyone. And it had cost me pieces of myself I would never get back. But this would be different. I didn't call to ask you back, I said. I called to tell you this. I deserved better. I deserve better. And from this moment on, I'm going to give it to myself. He exhaled, maybe to say something else, but I didn't wait. I hung up afterward. I sat there in the quiet, the phone still warm in my hand, and I realized he was never going to be who I needed. Not then, not now. Maybe not ever, but for the first time in decades, I had said what I needed to say. Without apology. Without softening it for his comfort, and it felt like air returning to lungs that had been half empty for too long after I hung up. I sat in the silence for what felt like hours. I could hear the refrigerator humming, the faint ticking of the old clock on the wall, the distant sound of a lawnmower from somewhere down the street. Everything felt far away, like I'd been dropped outside of my life and was watching it through a pane of glass. The ache in my chest wasn't just about the cancer. It was grief, but not just for the man who left me. I was mourning something deeper, something older. I was mourning the version of me who thought she was loved. I wandered through the house like a stranger. Each room felt like a museum of my own invisibility. His recliner still had the indent of his body. His slippers by the back door, his cologne in the bathroom cabinet like ghosts clinging to the walls, reminding me of all the years I bent myself into shapes that would keep him comfortable. I had built a life that revolved around everyone but me. For years, I put off small joys because there was always something else that needed doing, someone else who needed more. I told myself I didn't mind. I told myself it was love. But it wasn't love. It was self-erasure, performed quietly, dutifully, day after day, and for what? So that when I finally needed support, the person I gave my life to could vanish with a few cold words? I stood in front of the mirror in the hallway. My face line, tired, unfamiliar, stared back at me. I didn't recognize her. Not fully. I had become someone I didn't intend to be, soft-spoken, accommodating, always reasonable. Always last, I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who dreamed of art school, who wanted to backpack through Europe, who read poetry and stayed up all night painting watercolors. I remembered the way she laughed loudly, with her whole body. When did I stop laughing like that? When did I stop choosing myself? The day after the call, I sat on the porch in the early morning light with a cup of tea. The wind carried the scent of damp earth, and birds chirped in the distance. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the weight of his expectations hanging over me, but the grief was still there. A quiet, dull ache, not unlike the low hum of pain that comes after a wound has scabbed but not yet healed. I cried again. Not violently, not like before. This time it came slow, steady. The kind of tears that come from finally acknowledging a truth you've avoided for decades. I hadn't just lost him, I had lost myself a long time ago, and only now was I realizing how far gone I'd been. I started writing in an old spiral notebook I found in the kitchen drawer. I didn't plan to. I just opened it, picked up a pen, and started pouring everything out. Not just about the cancer, not just about him, but about all the years of silence, the ways I'd made myself smaller, the things I gave up, the things I never said out loud, and once I started, I couldn't stop. The words came in waves, memories, confessions, rage, heartbreak. I wrote until my hand cramped. When I finished, I felt hollowed out. But there was also something new there. Something I hadn't felt in a long time. It was as if, in writing it all down, I had made room for something else to grow. Something that belonged only to me. I still didn't know what came next. The road ahead was uncertain. I was scared of the treatments of being alone, of the long nights that stretched ahead with no familiar footsteps in the hallway. But somewhere deep inside, something had shifted. For the first time in my life, I was starting to ask, what do I need? What do I want? And the questions felt like a door slowly beginning to open. I woke up early the next morning, before the sun had even started to stretch across the bedroom walls. The air was cold, and the sheets beside me still held the faint imprint of his body, though he hadn't been there in days. Funny how absence can still leave a shape behind. I sat up slowly, pressing my palm to my chest. That ache was still there, but softer now. Less like an open wound and more like a bruise mark of something I survived. Downstairs, I brewed a cup of tea and stood by the window, watching the light come in, pale and hesitant. The world outside kept moving, indifferent to my heartbreak. Birds chirped. Cars passed. A man jogged by in a bright orange windbreaker, his dog tugging at the leash. And just like that, in the middle of that ordinary, nothing special moment, something inside me shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no flash of inspiration, no cinematic music swelling in the background. Just a quiet, steady realization settling into my bones. He is gone. And I am still here, still breathing, still standing. I took a sip of tea, the warmth blooming through me like something holy. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, I didn't feel like a ghost in my own life. I walked into the spare bedroom, what used to be our daughter's room, and opened the closet. Tucked in the back, behind boxes of old holiday decorations and forgotten photo albums, was a plastic bin marked Mom's art stuff. I hadn't touched it in decades. I pulled it out, dusted off the lid, and opened it. The smell of old sketch pads and dried paint hit me like a wave of memory. Tubes of acrylic, some hardened, some still pliable. Brushes, a little stiff with time. And at the bottom, my old watercolor notebook, the one I used to carry everywhere before marriage. Before motherhood, before I traded myself in for someone else's version of enough. I sat on the floor, cross-legged like I used to, and opened the notebook. Blank pages stared back at me, and I thought, maybe this is where I begin again. Maybe this isn't the end of my story. Maybe it's the start of something I never gave myself permission to want. I dipped a brush in water, mixed a bit of cobalt blue and ochre together on the palette, and dragged it across the page. My hand was unsure, hesitant, but it didn't matter. This wasn't about being good. This was about being alive. As the paint dried, I realized something. I didn't need to forgive him to move forward. Forgiveness wasn't owed. Not now. Maybe. Not ever. What I did need was to reclaim what I had abandoned: my voice, my joy, my right to take up space. I thought of all the times I'd swallowed my feelings. All the times I'd said, it's fine, when it wasn't. All the times I'd told myself, this is what love looks like. Even when it felt like loneliness in disguise. No more. That clarity felt like a clean cut through tangled vines. Not rage, not despair, just truth. I had given too much of myself away. But I was done bleeding for people who wouldn't even notice the stain. I grabbed the notebook, walked back into the kitchen, and stuck a bright yellow post-it on the fridge. I will not disappear. It wasn't a declaration for anyone else to see. It was for me, a promise. From here on out, I would stop waiting for apologies, for closure, for someone else to choose me. I would choose myself. Again and again, even on the hard days. Especially on the hard days. He showed up at my door 6 days later. No warning. No call, just the sound of tires on gravel, then the slow creak of the gate as he walked up the path. I watched from the kitchen window, the same way I might watch a storm cloud rolling in, knowing what's coming. Knowing I can't stop it, but no longer feeling the need to run. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I was just seeing him clearly for the first time in a long while. Slouched shoulders, a weariness in his face that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with shame. I opened the door, but I didn't invite him in. I just wanted to talk, he said, rubbing the back of his neck like a boy caught stealing. I shouldn't have left the way I did. That text, it was wrong. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. You didn't just leave wrong, you left when I needed you most. He looked down at his feet, the silence between us stretching tight. I got scared, he said finally. I didn't know how to be what you needed. No, I said, my voice firm. You didn't want to be. His head snapped up at that like the truth had slapped him. You want me to say I forgive you? I asked. You want me to make this easier for you so you don't have to carry the guilt? So you can feel like a decent man again? That's not fair, he said quietly. No, I said, sharper now. What's not fair is me spending decades giving and giving until I didn't recognize myself in the mirror. What's not fair is watching you retreat from our marriage, one passive-aggressive silence at a time, and still blaming your fear when you finally ran. He looked stunned, like the version of me he knew, the quiet one, the accommodating one, had been replaced by a stranger. But I wasn't a stranger. This was the version of me I had buried, and she was done keeping quiet. I came back because I want to make things right, he said, his voice low. I don't expect things to go back to how they were. I thought maybe you'd want to talk. I stared at him for a long moment. Part of me searched his face for something: sincerity, maybe regret, love, but all I saw was someone trying to patch a hole without understanding what tore it open. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. I couldn't bear to let him back into the space I was reclaiming. The house, my body, my life, they were all mine now. And I was not letting him track his guilt through them. "Do you even know what right looks like?" I asked. "Or do you just want me to pretend it didn't happen so you can feel okay again?" He shook his head. "I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. I thought maybe we could start again." The old me might have melted there. The old me would have been so relieved he came back, so desperate to be loved, she'd have opened the door and put the kettle on, but not anymore. I took a breath, deep and slow, and said what I knew I needed to say, double quotes, "No, we can't start again. Because this time I'm starting with me." He blinked, stunned. "So that's it? That's it. You made your choice. And I've made mine." There was a long silence. He looked like he wanted to say more, but instead he turned, walked back down the path, and drove away. This time, I didn't cry. This time, I stood on the porch with my arms crossed and my back straight, watching him leave like a woman finally choosing herself. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like freedom. It started small. An early morning walk, just as the fog was lifting from the streets. A cup of coffee from the little cafe 2 blocks down, one I'd passed 1,000 times, but never stepped inside. A new watercolor brush ordered online. A bright pink blouse. I once would have thought too loud. Each step was like touching the world. Again, after being numb for too long, there was something sacred in the quiet routines I was building. For the first time, I wasn't filling my days around someone else's needs. I didn't wake up wondering what he'd want for breakfast, or whether he'd be annoyed if I used the good towels, or if he'd notice if I looked tired. I noticed me now. I started painting in the afternoons, the sun slanting through the living room windows just right. My strokes were clumsy at first, like trying to speak a language I hadn't used in years, but it didn't matter. The colors were mine. The canvas was mine. The silence was mine. And slowly, the guilt started to fade. Guilt had lived in me like a second skin. Guilt for being too loud, too emotional, too needy. Guilt for wanting more. Guilt for dreaming, but now I could feel it peeling away. Day by day, layer by layer. I joined a support group for women in treatment. The first session, I almost didn't go. I sat in the parking lot with my keys in my lap, debating whether I was strong enough to hear other people's stories. Or worse still, mine, but I went in. And when I spoke, I didn't hold back. I was married for over 40 years, I told them. He left me the day I was diagnosed. Saw it, he didn't sign up for this. And for a while, I believed I deserved it. They didn't gasp, they didn't pity me, they nodded with soft, knowing eyes. Some of them had their own versions of that story. Abandonment just wears different names. Later, one of the women, Sarah, I think, touched my arm and said, "You know, you're braver than you think." I didn't believe her. Not then, but I didn't correct her either. I stopped cooking full meals every night. I started eating when I was hungry, not when a clock or a man told me to. I kept fresh flowers in the kitchen, not to impress anyone. But because I liked how the lily caught the morning light, I danced in my kitchen once. No music, just a rhythm in my chest that felt too strong to ignore. My hips awkward, my feet a little clumsy. But I laughed, really laughed, and it startled me how unfamiliar the sound was. God, when had I last laughed like that? My daughter called a few days later. She'd heard from her father something brief, something vague. She wanted to check on me. "Are you okay, Mom?" she asked. And for the first time, I didn't say I'm fine. "I'm figuring it out," I said. "But yes, I think I'm better than okay." She paused. Then I heard her voice crack just slightly. "I'm proud of you." And I realized I was proud of me too, not because I had conquered anything, but because I had finally started showing up for myself. There was still fear. I still had to go to treatment, still had to face uncertain test results, still had days where the weight of it all felt like a stone in my chest, but those days didn't define me. Not anymore. Because now I had tools, a paintbrush, a notebook, a yellow sticky note on the fridge. "I will not disappear." I read it every morning. I believed it a little more every day. Slowly, the woman I had once been, the loud, laughing, art-making, possibility-dreaming woman was returning, not as a ghost of who I used to be, but as something new, something whole. He wrote me a letter that came in a plain envelope. No return address. The handwriting was unmistakable, crooked in places, a little shaky. I stared at it on the counter for 2 days before I opened it. I wasn't afraid of what it would say. I was afraid of how it might try to pull me back on the third morning, after I returned from a doctor's appointment, blood work again, More waiting. I made a cup of tea, sat at the kitchen table, and slit the envelope open with the same calm you use when dressing an old wound. It was 3 pages, long, careful, the kind of letter you write when you want someone to forget who you've been. He said he was sorry. Said he hadn't realized how much of himself he'd lost until he left. That being alone made him realize how much I had always been holding things together. He said he'd seen me as strong and assumed I didn't need him in the ways he didn't know how to give. It was a confession, dressed as closure. Near the end, he wrote, "If there's any part of you that still believes in what we had, I'd like to come home. I want to make things right. I want to be the man I should have been." I folded the letter and stared out the window. The garden was starting to bloom again, lavender pushing through the soil, little shoots of green fighting toward the sun. There was a time when those words would have shattered me, when I would have seen them as salvation, when I would have clung to them like a rope, desperate to be pulled from the dark. But now? Now I saw them for what they were. Regret, not love, loneliness, not recognition. He missed the version of me who made things easy, who forgave before apologies were even spoken, who swallowed her voice and smiled through the ache in her chest. But that woman was gone. I stood, walked to the sink, and looked at my reflection in the window. Lined, yes, changed, yes, but clear, present, mine. I didn't need a final showdown. I didn't need to meet him face to face. I'd said everything I needed to say on the porch that day. What I needed now was a choice. So I sat back down, pulled out a fresh sheet of paper, and wrote him a letter of my own. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't rage or dissect every wound. I told the truth plainly. I told him I had spent too much of my life waiting to be chosen, waiting to matter, waiting for someone else's love to be the proof of my worth. And I told him I wasn't waiting anymore. I said I didn't hate him. I didn't even wish him harm. But I no longer saw him as a part of my future. That chapter was closed. I wished him peace. Then I folded the letter, sealed it, and left it by the door to mail the next morning. There was no dramatic relief when I stood up. No weight suddenly lifted. No music swelled in the background. But there was a quiet knowing in my bones. I had chosen myself. I didn't wait for his reply. The next day I bought a new canvas larger than I'd ever dared to use. It felt like a challenge, like a promise. I didn't know what I'd paint. I didn't care. The space belonged to me. Later that week, I walked into town and signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. Just a few evenings a week. Just enough to remind me that something still lived in my hands, something brave, something new. I didn't need the confrontation. I was the decision. And for the first time in my life, I had finally said yes to the only person who had never asked for anything but the truth. The results came back worse than I'd hoped. It was a Tuesday afternoon. Cloudless sky, sun so bright it made the hospital parking lot shimmer. The oncologist sat across from me in her soft gray sweater and kind eyes and said words I'd already rehearsed hearing but somehow still hadn't truly believed would come. The chemo wasn't working like they'd hoped. The tumor had shrunk slightly, yes, but new spots had appeared, small, stubborn. A new treatment plan would be needed. Stronger, more aggressive. I nodded while she spoke, but I didn't hear all of it. There was a high-pitched ring in my ears like a TV left on in the next room. My hands went cold. My throat tightened. I pressed my fingers into my knees to keep myself grounded. Stay here, I told myself. Stay in the room. She handed me a packet of papers, details, timelines, side effects. I stared at the words but couldn't absorb them. We'll give you time to think, she said gently. You're not alone. I gave her a small, numb smile and left the office, but as I walked through the fluorescent halls, past the family photos and hopeful posters, I felt it creeping in again, that familiar voice in the back of my head. This is too much. You need someone. I sat in the car for over an hour, watching people come and go, their lives folding around mine like waves, and I thought about calling him, just once, just to hear a familiar voice. I hated myself for it even. As I reached for the phone, but I stopped. I set it down on the passenger seat, like it was burning my fingers. This is what trauma does. It whispers to you when you're most afraid. It tells you that survival is only possible if you surrender your power, that you can't be whole without the thing that broke you, and I almost believed it. That night I cried harder than I had in weeks. The kind of crying that comes from deep in the gut, full-bodied, wordless. I screamed into a pillow, cursed the sky, told God I wasn't ready, told him I was tired. So goddamn tired. And when the crying passed, when my chest stopped heaving and my face was hot and puffy, I lay on the floor in the living room and stared at the ceiling fan spinning lazily above me. Then I did something I didn't expect. I reached for my journal. My hands were still shaking. My vision blurred, but I wrote anyway. This is hard. This is terrifying, and I want to be held. But I will not go backward to feel safe. I read that sentence over and over again. And something in me steadied. The next day, I called Sarah from the support group. I told her what had happened. She came over that afternoon with soup, lemon shortbread, and an honesty I didn't know I needed. You're allowed to be scared, she said, but don't mistake fear for weakness. You're still here. That means something. We sat on the porch wrapped in blankets as the sun dipped behind the trees. I told her about the letter from him, about how close I'd come to calling him again. She didn't judge me. She didn't tell me what I should feel. She just looked at me and said, healing doesn't mean the pain disappears. It means you learn not to give it the steering wheel. That night, I moved the sticky note on my fridge to the mirror in the hallway. See it every time I left the house. I will not disappear. Because no matter how sick I became, no matter how afraid I felt, I would not vanish into someone else's shadow again. Not even my own. This new treatment would be harder, but so was walking away from a man who abandoned me. So was learning to love myself in the aftermath. I'd done hard things before, and I could do this. It hit me again at 2:47 a.m. The kind of hour when the world is silent but your mind becomes loud. When shadows stretch across the bedroom walls and old memories crawl into bed beside you, uninvited. I hadn't been sleeping well since the new treatment started. My body ached in places I didn't even know could ache. My stomach twisted into knots, and food, once a source of comfort, had become a battleground. That night, I lay curled on my side, the blankets tangled around me, sweat sticking to my back, and I thought, what if I made the wrong decision? Not about the chemo, about everything else. What if I'd been too harsh? Too quick to shut the door? What if I had pushed away the only person who had known me since I was 20 years old? People make mistakes, don't they? Especially when they're scared. He was scared. I was scared. Maybe we both reacted out of fear. The doubt seeped in. Like cold air through a cracked window, I got up, padded to the kitchen in bare feet, poured a glass of water with trembling hands. The silence felt cavernous. I leaned against the counter and closed my eyes. Was I strong or just stubborn? That question clung to me for days. It followed me to the infusion chair, where nurses whispered kindly and the fluorescent lights never dimmed. It sat with me during my watercolor class, when my brush hovered over the page, frozen, unmotivated. It pressed against my ribs when I sat across from Sarah in the park, watching the wind toss leaves into spirals, and I told her, I'm not sure anymore, I confessed. I thought I was doing the right thing, choosing myself. But lately I feel alone, not empowered, just tired, just alone. She didn't jump to reassure me. Didn't offer quick comfort. She just said, it's okay to grieve the person you had to let go, even if it was the right decision. That cracked something open in me. I had been treating my choices like wall-solid, immovable. But choices have weight, and some of them press down on you long after they're made. I thought strength meant not looking back, but maybe real strength. It was being honest about the ache. So that night, I let myself miss him, not the man who walked out on me, but the boy who used to bring me wildflowers from the side of the road. The man who rubbed my back when I was in labor. The partner who used to hold my hand during movies and whisper punchlines a second before the actors spoke. There had been good, and losing that mattered. Even if I no longer wanted him in my life, I cried for what was. For the version of us that didn't survive. For the parts of myself I gave to someone who didn't know how to hold them, but I didn't cry to undo. I cried to release. And in the morning, I opened my journal and wrote, yes, I am alone. Yes, I am afraid, but that doesn't mean I was wrong. That doesn't mean I go back. Pain doesn't always mean regret. Sometimes it just means healing is happening. That afternoon, I drove to the beach. Just me, a thermos of tea, and a blanket. I sat for hours watching the tide pull in and out, steady as breath. The horizon stretched wide and wordless, and I thought, this is what peace looks like. Not perfect, but honest. When I got home, I moved the sticky note again from the mirror to the inside of my front door. I will not disappear, even when I miss what used to be, even when it hurts. Especially then. It's strange. The things that become real over time. The mornings are the hardest. Those moments when I wake up alone and feel the silence settle around me like a heavy quilt. The bed feels emptier now, even though it's just me in it. There was a time when I thought I couldn't do this, couldn't be without him. It was a terrifying thought. One that swallowed me up in the hours between sleep and wakefulness, back when I couldn't see beyond the sorrow of it all. But now it's something I live with. I never imagined I'd learn to fill these empty spaces with my own breath, my own hands. I thought the absence of him would always be a wound, fresh and bleeding, but somehow it's becoming a scar. Not one that marks me, but one that reminds me of the strength it took to grow from the hurt I had to let go. It wasn't a choice I made overnight. It wasn't even a choice I made consciously. One morning it just clicked. I wasn't waiting for him anymore. I don't think I realized how much I was waiting until it stopped. I didn't expect the absence to feel like this, like a sudden stillness in the air, but it does. And it's quieter than I ever anticipated. But it's also mine. I remember one morning just a few weeks ago. I had a good sleepful, not restless, and woke up with that quiet, steady feeling. No panic. No fear, just calm. The house still and warm. Felt like it belonged to me. I sat down at the kitchen table with my cup of tea, like I had 1,000 times before, and let myself imagine the future without him, without his disappointment or the weight of trying to fix things that were already broken, without the bitter taste of his absence hanging over my head like a storm cloud. I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. I was afraid of forgetting how to be with myself, but that fear faded, too. I opened the drawer to find some paper and a pen, deciding that today I was going to write out a list. A list of things I wanted to do, just for me, no obligations. No reasons other than to make myself feel something new. The list grew longer than I thought it would. There was something liberating about realizing that the only limit was how much I wanted to fill my life with. I had nothing holding me back anymore, no guilt, no memories weighing down my steps. The only thing I had to ask myself was, what do I want? I wrote it all down. I wanted to see Paris. I wanted to start an herb garden in the backyard. I wanted to paint more. I wanted to meet new people, new friends, even if it was just for a conversation over coffee, and there it was, staring at me in black ink, my future. A future without him, but it wasn't empty. It wasn't lacking. It was mine. I had been so focused on what I'd lost that I had forgotten how much I still had. My body was still here. My heart was still here. I still had things I wanted to do, places I wanted to go, people I wanted to meet. The grief was there too, but it wasn't the only thing that defined me anymore. I was reminded of Sarah's words from weeks ago. Healing doesn't mean the pain disappears. It means you learn not to give it the steering wheel. That was the moment I realized. I'm not running from the past. I'm just not letting it drive me anymore. It's still hard sometimes. When I pass the old places we used to visit together, the park bench by the lake, the coffee shop with the crooked door, the beach where we used to watch sunsets, I catch myself thinking that I'll turn the corner and he'll be there, that I'll hear his voice calling my name like it used to. But then the thought fades, as though the memory itself has learned to let go. And I keep walking, keep going. The pain doesn't disappear, but it becomes something else. It becomes a quiet acceptance, a place I visit but don't stay. A part of me will always mourn what could have been. A part of me will always carry the memory of who we were together. But that part of me doesn't need to hold me hostage anymore, and that, I think, is where true healing lies. I'm not afraid of facing a future without him. I'm not afraid of the quiet mornings or the long days ahead, because now I know, whatever comes, I'm enough. Just as I am. It started with a painting. I'd been sketching casually in the quiet moments when I had the energy. Some days it was nothing but doodles, the kind of things you do when you're bored or need to pass the time. But one afternoon, when the weather turned crisp and the light in the living room softened, I found myself picking up a brush. There was no real intention behind it, no grand design. Just a feeling, a spark of something, a small fire of curiosity, trying to catch hold in the corner of my chest. The canvas stared back at me, blank, waiting for me to decide what came next. I thought about the things I'd once loved, the things I'd forgotten. I thought about how I'd closed off parts of myself when life got too hard. I picked up the brush and began. At first, it was clumsy. The colors didn't blend the way I wanted them to. The lines felt awkward, unrefined. But there was something about the process that loosened me up. My fingers trembled slightly, but I pushed through. The rhythm of the brushstrokes filling the room with a quiet kind of energy. By the time the sun set, I had something that looked like a landscape. Not perfect, not even close, but it was mine. It felt good to have created something from nothing. That night, I realized how long it had been since I allowed myself to do something for no other reason than to simply enjoy it. I didn't have to sell it. I didn't have to show it to anyone. I didn't even need to finish it. I just needed to be present with it, and that feeling, that spark, stayed with me in the days that followed. It wasn't just the painting that awakened something. In me, it was the act of allowing myself to create again, to not be defined by my past or by the things I'd lost. A few weeks later, I enrolled in a local art class. It felt like a small thing, but it was also a quiet revolution, a declaration that I wasn't done not yet. I wasn't done learning, experiencing, or reaching for the things that made me feel alive. The first class was awkward, like you'd expect. I was older than most of the others, and I felt self-conscious. I kept glancing around the room, wondering if they could tell that I had no real artistic background. I'd spent years wrapped up in a life where creativity had taken a backseat to responsibilities, routines, and the expectations of others, but the instructor was kind, and so were the other students. They didn't judge, they didn't question why I was there. They just let me be. I threw myself into the projects, into each exercise, without the burden of comparison. It didn't matter if I was the best. It didn't matter if anyone ever saw my work. What mattered was the feeling of doing again, of creating something that wasn't tied to anyone else's approval. And the more I did it, the more I realized how much of me I had buried for years. It was like I was uncovering a part of myself I'd forgotten. I wasn't just learning to paint. I was learning to be me again, but it wasn't just art. It was the way I started seeing my life as a whole through a new lens. I began to feel the pulse of new possibilities in everything. I took walks in the evenings, finding joy in the small things, the sound of leaves crunching beneath my boots, the smell of wood smoke in the air, the way the sky turned from gray to pink as the sunset. It was the same world I'd always lived in, but somehow it felt different now. Like I was awake in a way I hadn't been for years. I started volunteering at a local community center, organizing classes for children who loved to draw. There was something so simple and fulfilling about being part of their world, watching their excitement as they picked up a crayon for the first time, or the way their faces lit up when they saw something they'd created, and I remembered what it felt like to believe in possibility again, to believe that the future wasn't a thing of shoulds and oughts, but a wide-open field waiting for me to step into it. The more I embraced these small acts of creation, whether it was through painting, gardening, or even laughing with new friends, the more I realized that the possibilities for my life were endless. I didn't need someone else to define my future. I didn't need approval or validation. I just needed to trust myself enough to say, I'm allowed to have this. I'm allowed to choose this. I'm still figuring it out, of course. The path is hardly ever clear, and some days feel like I'm walking through fog, but I'm no longer afraid of the fog. I know now that even in the uncertain places there is something beautiful waiting to be discovered, and I'm learning every day how to be open to whatever is next. It was one of those moments that caught me by surprise. I was at the farmer's market on a Saturday morning, just browsing the booths, enjoying the calm of the morning and the hum of soft conversations around me. It was one of my favorite things to do now, just wander, no agenda, no rush. The sunlight felt like a gift, and everything seemed to slow down in the best way. Then, as I was examining a bunch of fresh lavender, I heard a voice behind me. I never thought I'd see you here. I turned to find Ethan standing there, looking exactly the same as I remembered. His hair had a bit more gray in it, and his face was lined with time, but the same easy smile spread across his lips. For a moment, I froze, unsure of how to react. Ethan was the one person I never thought I'd run into again, not after everything. Not after the way I'd distanced myself from the people I had once cared about so much. For a second, I thought about walking away, about disappearing into the crowd, but that old reflex to avoid discomfort quickly faded. I had learned better than to run. Instead, I stood tall and met his eyes, trying not to let the flood of old feelings overtake me. Ethan, I said, my voice steady, though there was a knot in my stomach. It's been a while. He smiled, but there was an awkwardness in the air, like he didn't know what to say next. How have you been? His voice was warm, but there was a tentative note to it, a hesitance that I hadn't noticed in him before. I've been good, I said, surprising myself with the sincerity in my response. Really good, actually, he raised an eyebrow. Good to hear. I've been meaning to reach out, to check in, see how you're doing. I nodded, but there was a flicker of unease in me. The old Ethan, the one I had known all those years, would have slid effortlessly into a conversation like this, would have made it feel like nothing had changed. But this felt different. This wasn't the easy familiarity I had once known. It was fragile, tentative, like a bridge built of glass. I'm glad to hear that you're doing well, he continued, then paused. I've thought about you, you know. I've thought a lot about what happened. I felt a twinge of discomfort, but I kept my expression neutral. I wasn't here for apologies. I wasn't here to relive old wounds. That's kind of you, I said, my voice softer than I meant it to be. But then the question hit me. The one I had been avoiding, the one that had always lingered just beneath the surface. Why is he here? It was clear he wasn't just passing by. He had sought me out. I didn't expect to see you again like this, I said, the words coming out more matter-of-fact than I'd intended. After everything. Ethan shifted on his feet, looking uncomfortable for the first time in our conversation. His gaze dropped to the lavender in my hand, and I realized he was stalling. I had a moment of clarity. I could see the truth of the situation. Now he wanted something from me. Maybe it wasn't an apology, maybe it wasn't even reconciliation. But he wanted to see if he could still matter in my life, and that, in that moment, was a line I wouldn't cross. You don't have to say anything, really, he said, his voice taking on a softer tone. I just wanted to make sure you were all right, and I was wondering if we could catch up sometime, maybe talk. I felt my stomach tighten, the instinctive pull toward old patterns making my chest constrict. This was familiar. I had been here before, in this place where I was expected to meet someone halfway, to soften my boundaries just enough to allow them back in, but that wasn't me anymore. For a moment there was silence between us, and I could almost feel him trying to find the words to smooth things over, to shift my resolve. But I wasn't going to let him. I think it's time for us both to move on, I said, my voice softer. Now, but still firm, I'm sorry, but that's the truth. I turned then, my heart still pounding, but it was a different kind of pounding. It wasn't fear, it wasn't anxiety, it was power. Power I'd found in walking away from something that once felt so permanent. As I walked away, I felt the weight of the decision settling into my bones. I wasn't just closing a door. I was locking it and tossing the key into the sea. The house felt different now, not in a bad way. Not at all. It was as though the air itself had been cleared, the old shadows and unspoken tensions from the past drifting away like dust on a breeze. There was still a familiar comfort in the rooms, the creak of the floorboards, the way the light filtered through the kitchen window in the mornings, but now there was also space. Space for something new. I sat in the living room one evening, watching the soft flicker of the candle I'd lit. It was a small thing, but it felt like a victory. The small steps toward reclaiming peace. There had been a time when this house, was a place I dreaded coming back to. It was where memories of him lingered, of the years spent bending myself into shapes I thought would fit the life he wanted, the dreams I let fall away in the face of everyone else's needs. It had all felt so heavy. But now, with a few months of living for me, of creating and rediscovering, the weight had lifted. It wasn't about erasing the past. I couldn't do that. It was about finding freedom in it. About seeing it all, the love, the hurt, the losses, as a part of who I was, but not the defining part. It was a chapter in a larger story that was still being written. I'd spent so long trying to make sense of things that would never make sense, trying to fix relationships that were broken long before I could admit it. But now, I understood something I hadn't before. Closure doesn't come from an apology. It doesn't come from an explanation or an effort to fix what's been torn. It comes from within. It's a decision to move forward even when the past doesn't feel fully resolved, and so I had decided that it was enough. The endless apologies, the fruitless attempts at reconciliation, those were chapters I had closed. I was no longer waiting for anyone to tell me I was worthy of moving on. I had learned, painfully at times, that I didn't need anyone else's permission to embrace my own freedom. The air outside smelled fresh. The autumn chill was settling in, and I pulled on my favorite sweater, the soft, worn one I had kept for years. There was a quiet satisfaction in the simplicity of it all. A walk around the neighborhood, a mug of tea, a good book waiting on the table beside me. These small moments, these simple pleasures felt monumental now. They were the markers of my new life, the things that no longer had to compete with someone else's needs. I felt no sorrow, no regret in leaving behind the things and people that had weighed me down. There had been a time when I believed that love meant self-sacrifice, that being a good person meant constantly giving until there was nothing left of myself. I had learned, slowly and painfully, that real love, real peace comes when you give to yourself first, The phone buzzed beside me, and for a moment I hesitated. It was a text from my daughter, a simple question about the holidays. I smiled, my heart swelling with love for her. It was one of the few relationships that had remained untouched by the past. We had grown together, found new ways to communicate, and healed the rift that had once threatened to tear us apart. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't without its bumps. But it was real, and it was enough. I typed back, looking forward to seeing you. We'll make it special this year. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of expectations. I wasn't trying to mold myself into something for others. I was simply me, and that was more than enough. I leaned back against the couch, letting the quiet wash over me. The world outside was moving, but in this moment, I was perfectly still. I had come to realize that peace wasn't something I had to chase. It wasn't something I had to earn through constant sacrifice or approval. It was something I could choose right here, right now, and in that stillness I found my resolve. My chapter, was not defined by what had been taken from me, but by what I had reclaimed. The ability to stand in my own truth. The ability to choose my happiness without guilt or hesitation, the pain, the betrayal, the years of wondering if I was enough. It had all led me to this point. And I was no longer afraid to close the door on the past. I had everything I needed right here. I had me. As the night fell around me, I made a promise to myself, no more looking back. No more second-guessing. The future was mine to shape, to build with my own hands, to paint with the colors of my choice. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the world lift off my shoulders, and smiled. It was time to start the next chapter. I stood at the edge of the garden, watching the early morning light break through the trees. The grass was wet with dew, and the air was crisp, a reminder that change was in the air. I had always loved mornings, but now they felt different. They felt like a fresh start, a new beginning. The past year had been a whirlwind, filled with moments that felt like they would break me, but ultimately had built me up. The lessons had been hard and at times painful, but the freedom I had found in facing my fears and embracing the hard truths had changed me in ways I never expected. I thought about everything I had let go of, everything I had walked away from. It hadn't been easy, and at times I felt like I was walking through life without a map, just trusting my instincts. But now, standing here in the quiet of the morning, I could feel the strength in my bones, the uncheckable sense that I had done the right thing. The journey wasn't easy, but it was mine to take. I had come to understand that the end of something doesn't always mean loss. Sometimes it means freedom, and that was exactly what I had found. Freedom. I thought about Ethan. I thought about the years we spent together, the dreams we shared, and the way it all crumbled. But I no longer felt anger when I thought of him. There was no more pain, no more wishing for things to have turned out differently. Instead, I felt gratitude, not for the betrayal, not for the way things had ended, but for the person I had become. Because of it, I had learned my own worth. I had learned to stand on my own, to no longer shrink or bend or sacrifice my happiness for someone else. I could feel the tension in my shoulders easing, the last remnants of the past melting away. I was no longer afraid of what lay ahead because I knew that I could face it. I was strong enough. I was resilient enough. And most importantly, I was worthy of the life I wanted, one that was filled with peace, with love that was given freely and without expectation. I reached down and gently touched the flowers I had planted in the garden, lilacs and daisies, roses and sunflowers. There was something so satisfying in watching them grow, in nurturing them and seeing them bloom. It felt symbolic of my own growth. Slowly but surely, I had planted the seeds of my new life, and now I was beginning to see the flowers. They weren't perfect, but they were mine. They were real, and that was enough. I turned away from the garden and walked toward the house, my pace slow but sure. The kitchen window was open, and I could hear the faint sound of the birds outside. It was peaceful, quiet, just the way I liked it. The house was mine now, mine to fill with whatever I wanted, mine to shape in a way that suited me, not anyone else. Inside, the warmth of the kitchen wrapped around me as I poured myself a cup of tea, the steam rising gently. I took a sip, letting the hot liquid soothe me. It was in these quiet moments, in the small rituals, that I felt most connected to myself. It wasn't about the big, dramatic shifts anymore. It was about the small, consistent choices I made to prioritize my peace, to live with intention. My phone buzzed again, a message from my daughter. She wanted to know if I was free for lunch next weekend. A smile tugged at my lips. Yes, I thought. Yes, I was free. I was free to love her, to spend time with her, without the shadows of past regrets looming over me. I sat down at the kitchen table and let out a deep breath, the weight of everything that had happened finally feeling like it had settled in the right place. I wasn't carrying the past anymore. I wasn't holding on to things I couldn't change. What had been taken from me was now just a lesson, a chapter in a book that was finished. And the next chapter, it was entirely up to me. I had learned that I didn't need anyone else's validation to move forward. I didn't need anyone else to tell me I was worthy of happiness, of love, of joy. I was worthy because I had finally recognized it within myself. And that, more than anything, was the most important lesson of all. I stood up from the table and walked toward the door. I had places to go, things to do. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't rushing. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was simply living for me. As I stepped outside, the sunlight touched my face, warm and reassuring. The future stretched out before me, wide open, full of possibilities I had once feared to embrace, but not anymore. Now I was ready to take it all on, ready to move forward with strength, with grace, and with a heart that was open to whatever came next. And as I took a step into the world, I smiled to myself. I was finally free.